books that I would recommend either before getting started or getting started in business. And I want to thank Sharon Griffiths for this question. Sharon, I must confess, is a good friend of mine. She's a wonderful human being, primarily, but also a property investor and a networking host of Progressive Property Network Brentwood. And if you want to get tickets to her event, which she co-hosts with Alex and Mark, please see the link below and get a ticket to her event, which is absolutely wonderful at PPN Brentwood. So thank you, Sharon, for this wonderful question. She actually asks for the top 3 books that I recommend. I could probably go on all day about books I would recommend, but I'm going to give you some different choices that might surprise you, Sharon, and hopefully this will help other people in the audience too. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is Why A Students Work for C Students by a guy called Robert Kiyosaki from Rich Dad, Poor Dad fame. And the reason why I like that book is, number one, it's much smaller and easier to digest than his Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. It does lean a lot into the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, so you still get the general gist. But most importantly, it talks about the famous quadrant, which is employed, self-employed, business owner, and investor. And it also gives a lot of very practical information, advice, and guidance about why is it that people who are sort of average in terms of their academic achievements can go on and become incredibly successful, whereas people who are academically very gifted tend to have pretty decent jobs in terms of professional recognition, but not necessarily financial success. So I would certainly recommend that book as my first read of the day. And I also think learning about that cash flow quadrant is absolutely essential because it changed my entire perspective on life as well as on how to access wealth. And that is a cornerstone book, something that I read and then reread and then reread again. And there's notes everywhere. I even have it as an audio book on my phone. So when I'm doing a long journey, I'll also listen to that book in the car. So that's book number 1, Sharon. I hope that's useful. The second one is a little bit different. Most people don't actually know this book, but it's called Branson Behind the Mask by a journalist called Tom Bauer. And the reason why I like this book is because a lot of people talk about Richard Branson and how successful he is. And of course, he's interviewed many, multiple times over the last 4 decades. And what this book actually does is it sort of lifts the hood up and starts asking some quite challenging questions about the business practices that Richard Branson partook in within all of his businesses, including the music business, the rail transport business, the air transport aviation business, taking people to space business, the balloon business, his cola business, his mobile phone business, Virgin Banking. It really took a deep dive into all of those things, and it sort of analyzes what contributions Richard Branson actually made, how successful those contributions actually were, and more importantly, the people who got left behind when those businesses ended up collapsing or going into some sort of buyout, and the people who bought them out lost a lot of money on them. It also includes his failed attempt to get the National Lottery as well. And it also talks about dirty tricks, which is something that Richard Branson talks about a lot within his autobiographies or ghost-written biographies and a lot of his interviews. So is he really the happy-go-lucky buccaneer that he is made out to be. Well, in Bauer's book, he argues that no, he isn't. Actually, he's a bit of a con man. And the reason why I enjoy that book is because my view, at least, is that Richard Branson has an exceptionally talented marketing team behind him to promote a facade, if you like, of what it is to be this successful entrepreneur. Even like the purchase of Necker Island, for example, like how he came to get that and what he's actually done with it and the breaches for the government contract and so on. Really interesting stuff in that book. I highly recommend it because it teaches you to have a healthy amount of cynicism and encourages you to read beyond the facade, to actually dig a little bit deeper into the circumstances and into the facts of what people actually say and do versus what they actually have and have not. So the book is called Branson Behind the Mask by Tom Bauer. I highly recommend it. There was an application to have that book removed, which was quite interesting from Branson and his team. And it actually stood up to scrutiny. All of the things that Bauer claims in the book are verifiably correct. So that's quite interesting because he also talks about that, like using the full weight of the legal system to try and get an unpopular opinion banned. Even that in itself is quite an interesting and, if I might say, quite a sexy spin on a book. So I do recommend Branson Behind the Mask by Tom Bauer, which, is a really great read. Stop! Before you go any further, if you're enjoying this content, remember to give us a subscribe, a like, a follow, or a share. Every single person that clicks on those buttons, it means the world to us because it helps us reach more people and get people educated in how to get wealth the lazy way. And potentially the third book that I recommend, which is more of a local book to me. So the book is called Cocky: The Rise and Fall of Curtis Warren, Britain's Biggest Drug Baron. And it's by a chap called Tom Barnes. And the reason why I like this book is because it goes into a lot of detail about Curtis Warren's life from very young age right the way through to his ultimate arrest by the Dutch police and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit sort of outdated now because Curtis, of course, has been out of prison for a little while now. From that particular stretch. But the reason why that book is so good is because when you strip back business, what is it? It's a supply and a demand economy, okay? So do I think that people should put illegal narcotics in their body? No, I don't. I don't agree with that at all, actually. I have family members who are regular drug users. It's not something I agree with. But there is a demand for it, and there is a demand, therefore there should always have an equal or counteractive supply to keep people fed in that demand. And not only does this chap, with no formal education to speak of, with no business advisors, when I say business advisors, I mean accountants and lawyers and people who could run a multi-million pound blue chip company, which, Curtis Warren was running at one time almost £1 billion worth of product. £1 billion of product, not only without any advisors like a board of chief executives and chief financial officers and chief operating officers and banks to lend money to him. Not only did he not need anybody else's capital, but also he managed to evade the police, customs and excise, Her Majesty's Customs and Excise at the time. And also his fellow rival sort of gang members who were quite happy to use violence to, expand their territory. So you have to think about this chap. No formal education, no ability to lend money from the banks, no formal advisors, somehow manages to grow a £1 billion empire. So rich, in fact, was he that he actually forgot where he buried bags of money. That's crazy, right? So how does a guy with no formal education, no access to advisors, no access to bank finance, run a multi-billion pound empire from Liverpool, where this is before the day and age of smartphones, where you used to have to get burner phones. The man could memorize phone numbers of people in his supply chain. When he would throw away his phone and he would just have the numbers stored in his head because he was paranoid the police would get the number, get his phone and then get the phone numbers. There was people that were looking out to kill him because he was getting on people's territories and so on and so forth. So he evades the police, who are, you know, in my opinion, the largest organized bunch of criminals in the United Kingdom. They do the will of the politicians. They don't protect and serve the people. And they have national intelligence. They have hundreds of millions of pounds given to them from the taxpayer via the government on an annual basis. They now use that to, you know, investigate people's tweets rather than solve crime, you know, which is quite interesting. But they have tens of millions, hundreds of millions and billions of pounds in budget. They couldn't get him. And then they have Her Majesty's, as it was Her Majesty at the time, Customs and Excise. They couldn't get him. Eventually, you know, it was an informant that sort of broke everything up. And it required international cooperation with multiple police agencies and criminal intelligence agencies to catch one guy. I mean, just think about that. If this man was given an opportunity to run a blue chip organization, leaving out the illegal part of things, obviously, for a moment, just think about the skill that he must have had, and probably still does. I don't know, because I don't know Curtis Warren personally. I've never met him. But the skill that this man had in order to be able to grow a business, keep the wolves at bay, the people who were trying to kill him with guns and knives and all the rest of it, the people he had to work with internationally. So we had this international distribution and supply chain. And then, of course, evade the police all at the same time. I mean, that's a man, if I was in business, I would want to study, which I absolutely did, because, you know, what are the skills and attributes he has, or he had certainly, that allowed him to run a £1 billion empire without any of the normal facilities you would expect to have in a multi-billion pound business. I mean, that's got to be worth reading about, surely. So for that reason, Sharon, Cocky, The Rise and Fall of Curtis Warren, Britain's Biggest Drug Baron, is my third selection on the list of books. For a bonus, though, I would say another book that absolutely changed my life and encouraged me to take action was The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss, which is a bit more of a mainstream book now about business and changing mindset. I actually remember buying it at Euston Station, WH Smith's. I was returning home from working in London. I worked in London Monday to Friday, 9 till 7 p.m. typically. And I would come home on a Friday night on the train to Euston to Liverpool Lime Street. And I would get home, I think it was about 10:30. It was the last train of the evening. I'd get picked up by my son's mum. And I would spend all Saturday with my family, a little bit of Sunday, and then I get the train back Sunday night. And because it was a weekend, I could get the first class ticket for £15, which was actually quite good because you got bigger seats. But I digress. Anyway, going to WH Smith's, and it used to be you buy one book, you get another book half price. So I got Timothy Ferriss, 4-Hour Workweek, and I think it was, oh crikey, what was it? Something about psychopaths. I can't remember it now. The Psychopath Test or something like that it was called, which I didn't even get round to reading, being honest. Because I opened the book, Timothy Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and I started reading it. And by the time I got to Liverpool Lime Street, I decided I was going to quit my job after reading this book. And my partner at the time thought I was absolutely insane. But in the book, Timothy Ferriss asks, what do you want to do when you retire? What is it you want to do? Write down a load of things that you want to do when you retire. And I didn't have any paper, but I was going in my head, I want to go scuba diving. I want to jump out of a plane. I want to go on a camel ride in the desert. All the stuff that probably a lot of people say. And you flip over the next page and it says, what guarantee do you have that you're going to be able to do those things? And when you have like one of those moments, that was my moment. And he goes on to say, when do you know if you're going to die? And I was like, here I am traveling 200 kilometers an hour on a train. Trains don't often get into accidents in the UK, but they do. The train could have derailed and that would have been it. That would have been the end of me. Or, you could be driving and people pass away from driving all the time. I've certainly got school friends and family who have died far too young. Very recently, I learned a lady called Suzanne, who was in my primary school, in my year group, has passed away from a very sudden and aggressive cancer that was in late May, early June of 2025. So she would have been 43, possibly 44 years of age, dead, leaving behind children and a husband and obviously a loving family. So that book hit home to me, and seeing friends that I grew up with around me who served in the military and who'd been succumbed to drugs and other types of violence, who died, some had committed suicide. It really, really affected me, this book. And I was like, oh my God, I am wasting my life. I'm working for very nice people, a very nice company. With my boss was fantastic. Shout out to Dave Robotham and Nick James. But the company, were lovely. But for me, my entire perspective on life changed after reading just a few chapters in for the 4-hour work week. So if you need an excuse to change your life, to change your mindset, or if you're not sitting comfortably in your 9-to-5 job, your corporate job, or your normal 9-to-5 job, I would strongly recommend Timothy Ferriss' 4-hour work week. And even to the point where, he learned the rules of the system and then learned how to use those rules to his advantage. I mean, in business, in life, that's what you want to do, right? You want to learn the rules and leverage the rules to your advantage. So, for example, in the book, Tim Ferriss, he talks about becoming a national champion, fighting champion in China. And basically, the rules are, if somebody gets thrown out of the ring, they lose. So rather than his technical ability to be able to fight, all he did was focus on throwing his opponent out the ring, and he would win by default. And that's exactly what he did. And he became a national champion just because he learned the rules and he learned how to manipulate the system, if you like. And in business, who doesn't want to do that? So, you get taxed so heavily in the UK. Why do you want to stay in the UK? Move. Use the international globalized economy to your advantage. That's a great idea. Learn the rules, stick to them, most importantly, stick to the rules, but be aware of what those rules are and use them to your advantage. So Timothy Ferriss would be my fourth choice, Sharon. I hope that's been useful. And I'm just going to check my phone because this is where she messaged me. Another question. So what top 3 books would you recommend I read when or before getting started? So hopefully I gave you 4, Sharon. So buy 3, get 1 free. And then she says, what 5 non-negotiable actions should I have worked on and done as a priority directly after making the decision to change my life through property investing? And she gives me a very specific time, 23:50 hours on the 31st of March, 2017. That was incredibly specific, Sharon. Thank you. I know a little bit about Sharon's story, so I know why that's important. So, 5 non-negotiable actions. Okay, let's have a little go at them then. 5 non-negotiable actions. So, first one, I think, get educated in property. What I mean by that is, I'm not necessarily talking about paying for expensive courses through the various training providers that are available. But I mean, go to networking events. You can pay $0 through to £30 a ticket to go to your local networking events in property. They will very often have guest speakers on there that will talk to you about a variety of topics, from taxation to investments to building portfolios to health and safety to inspiration and motivational speaking, such a range of things, honestly. So I would do that in the first instance. That would be number one goal. And number two sort of mixes in with that. When you're at the networking events, start talking to people and be honest about your journey. So if I walked into a networking event and said, "Hi, I'm Carl. I got loads of properties, knowing full well I had zero, that would not be the correct approach. Going into the networking event without any properties, because it was when to begin with, as Sharon says, my name's Carl. This is my first time at a networking event. I'm really keen to become involved in property. I don't know very much about property at the moment, but I'm keen to learn from the people in the audience. So if anyone's got any advice, hints or tips they would like to share with me, I'd love to go out for a coffee sometime." Wow, that's real power. Being able to have that outspoken conversation, because a lot of people, they get in their own way, right? What they do is they sit there going, "Oh God, I don't know anything. People are going to think I'm stupid. I don't want to look at anybody because they'll know that I shouldn't be here. I'm an imposter." And this is what we call the imposter syndrome, right? But owning that imposter in the room, owning that I don't know stuff, you have no idea how powerful that is when you walk into a room. And being willing and able to say, "Look, guys, I'm not going to muck you around. I don't know anything. I've just come. It's my first day. I'm really interested to learn about property. I read on Google that I can make money from it. I don't know anything about how to do that. So I've come here to learn." I'm loving the speaker that's been on today talking about, how to add value to a property. If anybody in here is a landlord who's done that, I'd love to buy you a coffee and just pick your brains. Or, if you're offering opportunities to go and see your projects, I'd love to come out and see your projects. All of which, by the way, I do. I take people onto our projects and show them the work that we're doing, or show them the work that we've done, show them the figures, the GDV, the gross value after the build has been completed. And, they're real opportunities for people to learn. I don't expect everybody to know everything. I certainly don't know everything still, but I know what's in my lane and I can predict the traffic and how that moves, right? So if you don't know something, be honest, say you don't know. Even if you're at networking events, or even if you pay for some training, say you don't know. And it's okay to be the dumbest person in the room. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I like to be the dumbest person in the room. And the reason for that is because if I'm the dumbest person in the room, I've got multiple opportunities to learn from lots of different people. So there's point number two. Other things, taken actions that I would do is I would write down, I don't mean think about, whether it's in your phone, whether it's on paper, write down what you want to achieve and by when. So something like, you've got to be like hyper specific. So within 5 years, I want to own 10 buy-to-let properties that are going to generate £3,000 a month, positive cash flow, and I'm going to quit my job. Okay? It's not hyper specific, but it's specific enough for this example. That is something for you now to work on and work backwards from. So in 5 years, okay, so year 5, you're going to have this. Year 4, you're going to have this. Year 3, you're going to have this, and so on and so on. You'll notice I'm working backwards, not forwards. Because in something called pull planning, we use in construction, particularly in lean construction, we actually look at the end in mind and then we work backwards. So what do we need to do to get to the end? Well, we need to have this, this, and this signed off. Okay, great. How do we get them signed off? Well, we need to have second and final fixes. We need to have snagging done. Okay, great. Then what do we need to have? And so on and so on and so on. So we work backwards. Being able to work backwards gives you a tremendous amount of insight into what your goals actually are. And even if you don't know some of the answers, you've got blanks, you can get help for free very often, because there are experienced property landlords and experienced property investors who will happily sit down with you because they want to give their knowledge to you for free. Buy them a coffee. It gives them just a nice little outlet. And I love going out to have a hot chocolate with people in Costa Coffee. Just a bit of a hint there, large hot chocolate with cream and marshmallows. That's my thing. And it's like £5.60 in Liverpool at the moment for that. So if you want to buy me a £5.60 hot chocolate and get my knowledge, I'm happy to do it. So make an appointment, come and see me, okay? Being the dumbest person in the room is a great way to start your property journey. I actually paid to go on a property course, and because I came from a construction background, I was, I would say, arrogant and cocky before I came to the course. I was like, what are these people going to teach me about property? You know, you save 25%, you get a buy-to-let, you save another 25%, you get another buy-to-let, and so on and so forth. And I went on this course, and it was Anne and Tony running the course, and blew me away. From the first 20 minutes in, I was like, I don't know any of this. And I was so happy that I didn't know any of it, because although I started off cocky and arrogant, when I realized I didn't know, that just wiped away off my shoulders. And I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And I'm furiously scribbling away in the books. And, you know, it was one of the best investments in myself that I ever made. And I have a lot to be grateful for that particular course. So shout out to Tony and to Anne for changing the direction and the course of my life in terms of building assets and how to do it within property. So props to Anne and Tony. So third thing I would say to start doing, third thing was about writing your goals. The fourth thing I think would be to tell everybody in your close circle what you want to do. So that might be your husband, wife, partner, whatever you have. It could be your sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, mum, dad, nan, granddad, whatever it is, pet dog. And this is really important. I'm going to take a drink because it's that important. This is really important because when you tell everybody that you're thinking about getting into a business, property, whatever it is, the overwhelming majority of people in your circle will say, don't do it. And they'll say it with no experience and no knowledge of what you're talking about at all. So I remember I used to be married. Version number one, I call her. It's a wife, version number one. And she used to say this to me all the time. Why can't you just be happy being in a job? Because from the time that she met me to the time when we divorced and no longer spoke to each other, I was never happy working for other people. I worked for other people for a few years, but I was miserable doing it because I always thought, you know, I'm putting money into other people's pockets. My skill, my knowledge is worth more than this, but I'm obviously paying other people's brand new houses and brand new cars and putting their kids through private school and paying for their kids to have horses and stables and, 12 acres of farmland in mid Wales. You know, I'm getting paid well, but I'm not getting paid well enough to have all of those things. What is it that I'm doing wrong and they're doing right? And, you know, the way for me, I come from a council estate. I started with zero, was, you know, a knowledge acquisition and learning how to leverage that knowledge came much later. It came in my 40s. So I built my knowledge base so I could physically do stuff that people were willing to pay for. So I became a security and a health and safety consultant. I did all the paperwork and traveled the world doing that sort of thing. Got all the diplomas and all of the charterships and professional memberships and all the right pieces of paper to say that I know what I'm talking about. And then that was great. And that was enough to give me a job that was very well paying. But what it wasn't enough to do was actually afford the nice house, the nice car, the horse and the stables and all the other things, the private school for the kids and so on and so forth. So therefore, I sort of was very unsatisfied with what I was doing and why. And version number one couldn't fathom that. And then rolls along what I will now call version two. And version two my lovely wife, Rachel, she comes along on a fluffy cloud of loveliness, because that's where she lives at all times. She's an optimistic person. I'm a pessimist. She's an optimist. So it's really interesting in our house. And I'm like, listen, babe, I'm thinking about setting up a company, doing this, this, and this. And she's like, that sounds really daft. Don't do that. And I said, right, okay. And she goes to bed. And then I do it. And she's like, oh my God, what have you done? She doesn't really talk that way, but similar. And then she fully supported me in what I was going to do, even though it was crazy, and it's paid off. It's paid off big time. But she supported me every step of the way. So this is where, coming back to this piece of advice, tell everybody in your circle. There will be people in your circle who will say to you outright, no, don't do it. Don't be stupid. You've got a good job. Just stick at your job. What if you can't pay your bills? What if you can't pay your rent? What if you can't pay your mortgage? There's always going to be those people in your life. But there's also going to be some people that will instantly go, oh my God, I'm so pleased for you. Do you need any help? They are very rare. I mean, I'm talking hen's teeth rare. But when you find those people, never let them go. Okay? My wife, version number 2, is that person. She's the hen's tooth. How can I help? Oh my God. You have I'm getting a bit emotional now talking about it. You have no idea the amount of love, appreciation, and support, how much that accelerates your journey. Just having somebody there who's your cheerleader, which I talk about very often in my public speaking and motivational speaking sessions, having a cheerleader. That's why you need to tell everybody, find your cheerleader. You will also find some people who will say no initially, and then they'll start seeing you, do a little bit, and they'll be like, oh, okay, how can I help? But don't expect anybody to be sharing your social media all the time. Don't expect these people to buy your products and services, because they won't. They'll buy something from a celebrity, but if you launch a perfume line, they'll go out and buy Dior. They'll go out and buy Katy Perry and Katie Price even, maybe even Britney Spears perfume. But will they buy Carl from Birkenhead's perfume? No, they will not. Even though it might be the same quality ingredients. So find your circle by telling everybody what you do, and the ones that are actually there, stick to them and help them and support them as well. I was watching on social media recently, it was a story, I don't know how true this story is, but it made me think about what I've just said. A son is getting married, and he says to his dad, Dad, this is a list of all my friends. Can you please invite them to the wedding for me? And the dad's like, son, I got you, don't worry. And on the day of the wedding, there was meant to be 50 of his friends that turned up, and there was only 6. And the son, the groom, is furious with his dad. He said, Dad, you really let me down. I gave you a simple task. And he said, what went wrong? And he said, nothing went wrong, son. He said, what I did is I contacted all of the friends on that list, and I said, my son is in real trouble and he needs your help. I need you to be here on this date and this time. And these are the people that showed up. I absolutely love that story. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that story resonates with me, because I've had people in my corner who have done everything they could to be a millstone around my neck, to be an anchor. And I've had somebody who's been my cheerleader. And I can tell you now, I've accelerated my life because I had a cheerleader. So tell everyone in your group, find your cheerleader and stick to them. Don't ever let them go, because they're the people who are going to keep you supported when you feel deflated. Okay? It's not a solo journey. Even if you might be a solopreneur, you need somebody in your corner backing you up. So that's number 4. Number 5, things I wished. I think it would be understanding the fear of money. And what I mean by that is, when you don't have money, you are terrified about talking to people about money. You're talking to potential investors because, they've got all the money, and you're thinking to yourself, why are they going to give me money? Well, there's an interesting thing about investors. When they've got money, they know, like a river, money needs to flow, because if it doesn't flow, it goes rancid. All of the life inside of it dies and you can't drink from the river anymore. If your money stays still for too long, the taxman are going to come along and they're going to take your money off you, or it's going to become depreciating. It's going to devalue because the cost of everything goes up, inflation, capital appreciation. So if you don't keep your money moving, it will die. Okay? So when you're talking to an investor, very often, if you've not got money, you think of it as, they're up there on a pedestal, they've got all the money, and I don't have any money. They're more important than I am because they've got all this money. And what can I do? I can just build houses. I can just put you in touch with people who can get stuff done. That skill is absolutely on par with having money. Okay? You need the money. That's one side of the triangle. You need the skill and the expertise. That's the other side of the triangle. And then underneath, you need the time. So people with money might not have time and they might not have the skill. So if you can provide the time and the skill, they can provide the money. You have your triangle. You have now a successful project potential. So when you're talking to people such as investors, go in with the mindset that we are equal. You have something that I need, but I have something that you need as well. There's something that you might need is time and or skill. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be investors in the first place. By definition, if you're an investor, you're looking to spend the money. You're looking to invest the money sensibly, of course, and with caution, but you are looking to invest the money. So when you see Dragon's Den on the telly, or Shark Tank if you're from the United States, and you say, hi, my name's Carl and I'm looking for £100,000 for my Lazy Wealth Creation cup business. We've sold 3 cups so far for £2.99 each. And I believe this is a multi-million-pound business. Obviously, the investors are going to want to ask some serious questions like, well, how have you valued your cup-making business at £1 million when, you've sold 3 cups for £2.99? And it might be that I've got an order in my pocket from, the Ritz, and they love Lazy Wealth Creation as a brand. Ritz, by the way, Ritz-Carlton, if you love Lazy Wealth Creation, please get in touch. We'll be happy to supply you with our fine Lazy Wealth Creation podcast cups throughout all of your hotels around the world. And it might be that I've got an order from them for 3 million cups, which I have to fulfill in the next 90 days. So all of a sudden, it's not about, I've sold 3 cups. It's about what else. And something interesting I learned recently, it made me think. I was watching it online. I love doom scrolling because you get some nuggets every now and then. The difference between a rich person and a person without wealth. You say, oh, do you want to buy, this bag, this imaginary bag? Do you want to buy this imaginary bag for £1,000? And he said, God, no, that bag's a cheap bag from TK Maxx, right? But a rich person will go, why? What's in the bag? We didn't ask what was in the bag. And it could be that there's a gold bar in the bag worth £30,000. So that's the big difference, right? It's the why should I invest in you? So investors want to invest. They're halfway there. Your job, you've got the invite to the party. Your job is just to convince them to leave with you. That's all you've got to do. You got to smell good, you got to look good, and you got to have a convincing enough story that makes an investor who's going to do due diligence on you go, actually, that makes sense, yeah. So we had an investor in our property portfolio, me and my business partner, and we met them in a SaaS forum, a SaaS pension forum. We pitched our deal, which was buying a residential house, which they would purchase. They would have first charge on the property. So that means if we did something terrible, they could take the property off us because they would own it. And at the end of it, we would refinance it after we'd done all the refurbishments, turned it into a house with multiple occupants, an HMO. And we would refinance and then repay them. And we would pay them a set amount of interest every month. And I think the house price was £145,000 for a 4-bedroomed residential property. And we turned it into a 6-bedroom HMO. So they put up the 145 grand. We paid them roughly £1,500 a month in interest. And then when we refinanced, they got the £145,000 back, and we got most of our money back as well that we'd invested in the refurbishment. And now we have a cash-flowing, cash-producing asset but the investor got the principal back, but also cash every month, which is feeding her stream of money. Okay, that's a happy investor, and that's what we need to look for. So the fifth piece of advice is, when you find your investor, don't be panicking about, oh, they've got all the money. They do, but they don't have necessarily all the time or all the skill, or both, which is what you have. So keep yourself sharp. Don't be afraid to go in there with the confidence that you genuinely do deserve to say, actually, I can provide this time, I can provide this skill if you provide the money, and we can both gain financially and otherwise from this project. That is just one small example of how and why we've done that. So there's my, I think, 5 things that I would have told myself before I started, and that would have given me an accelerated head start from where I am, albeit I did retire after 3 years of starting. So, I was already doing quite well. Hope that's been useful. Sharon, thank you so much for those very insightful questions, which was the 3 books and the 5 things you would do if you were starting out for the first time. I look forward to answering more questions on the next episode.